The conflict in Ukraine is rapidly transforming into a propaganda war on the doorstep of Russia. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is located on Russia's border, and rumors of an invasion are being spread very loudly as a result of Russia's occupation of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea. Many Eastern NATO countries have been left vulnerable, including Poland, as well. Poland shares its long eastern borders with Ukraine and Russia's ally Belarus, and its border of about 200 kilometers in the northeast corner with Russia's outer region of Kaliningrad. As we all know, communist rule in Poland ended in 1989, but the threat of Russian rape is still strongly felt in Poland. The allegations against Russia have not been resolved. The concentration of Russian troops in Killin, which is approximately 322 kilometers north of Warsaw and located in Russia's Baltic Sea, contributed to the escalation of regional concerns in Poland. Kaliningrad remains the most militarized region in Europe. At the conclusion of World War II, the Soviet Union took control of Kaliningrad, formerly referred to as Königsberg, and a region that was a part of East PR. On the other hand, Russia considers Kaliningrad to be a vulnerable outpost in the region. The deployment of 4 battalions to Poland and 3 Baltic states at the end of NATO's Warsaw Summit in July 2016 exacerbated concerns regarding the organization's potential for aggressive behavior. Kaliningrad has always been a prominent spot on Europe's military map. However, its importance has increased even more since the start of the Ukrainian war in the event of a conflict between Russia and NATO. Additionally, Kaliningrad is home to Russia's Baltic Sea Fleet and tens of thousands of soldiers. The Russians would move from Kaliningrad to seize the so-called Sochi Gap, a piece of land in the Polish-Lithuanian border, stretching between Kaliningrad and Russia's ally, B, which would allow the Russians to isolate the Baltic states from the rest of NATO. The Russians would move from Kaliningrad to seize the so-called Sochi Gap. At the same time, Poland and the Baltic states are becoming increasingly anxious about their own security as a result of Russia's annexation of Crimea and its support for ethnic Russian rebels elsewhere in. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is taking some preventative measures because it does not discount the possibility that Russia will take such a risky action. The risk posed by Russia is being significantly reduced. Thanks to NATO's efforts to surround the Russian border in Poland, it is clear that Poland is getting ready for battle, as evidenced by the accumulation of hundreds of pieces of military hardware across the dozen, hundreds or even thousands of pieces of military hardware such as armored personnel carriers, heavy tanks like the M1 Abrams, army tractors, trucks, and other specialized equipment were observed in the ports of Poland. There are rumblings that Warsaw is making preparations for war, and those rumors are picking up steam. This is especially true given the fact that there is equipment here that Ukraine does not have access. The video footage that was shot in the Polish port shows hundreds of armored personnel carriers and armored vehicles, special tractors and evacuation vehicles, ambulances, tanks, and other pieces of equipment. This is due to the fact that only one Abrams tank can be sent to Ukraine in the year 2024. The hypothesis that these weapons were being ready for shipment to Ukraine is not supported by There is no official explanation as to how a significant amount of military equipment suddenly appeared in Poland at this time. On the other hand, it is common knowledge that the Polish army has established a presence in the Kaliningrad region and in the vicinity of the Belarusian border from Warsaw all the way to Russia. There is a high level of tension and there is a risk of, in a nutshell, anything that cannot be approached on the borders of Poland. This would be the first time that Russia and NATO would be in direct conflict with each other. There are times when Poland, NATO, and Russia are all engaged in a great deal of activity. Now let's shift our course to take us through yet another Baltic nation. Over the course of several decades, Estonia border patrol officers have kept a wary eye on the narrow Narva River that divides their country from. This formidable medieval pass not only serves as the boundary between NATO and its traditional foe, but it is also encircled on both sides by imposing castles and is one of the possible routes of invasion by Russian tank troops in the event of a full-scale invasion. Estonia's precarious position and long history of imperial subjugation by successive Russian empires have left Estonia's talented individuals with little confidence in Moscow. It should not come as then that Estonia has been one of the most staunch supporters of Ukraine ever since it won its independence from the crumbling Soviet Union on the eve of a full-scale invasion of Russia. Estonia has been among the most staunch supporters of Ukraine ever since. When exactly? We are confident that President Putin is not insane enough to have started a war in Europe. even if there are experts who say other. Estonia, a member of NATO with a population of only 1.3 million, had a defense budget that was nearly 1,000 times smaller. The United States was one of the first countries to deliver the Javelin anti-tank guns, which would later prove to be an essential component in the defense of Kiev. Since then, the nation has given Ukraine its entire arsenal of 155mm howitzers, among other pieces of equip, making it the most generous of all Western countries in terms of financial assistance in relation to the total GDP. In addition, Estonia provided shelter to over 62,000 Ukrainian refugees, which represents the highest proportion of the national population of any country in the European Union. Although Poland and the Baltic states have been rejected by the Kremlin as the new moral center of gravity in Europe due to their extremism, Estonia and the other Baltic states have been. This is despite the fact that the political, military, and economic weight is still in the West and has been for many years individualized and paid little attention to warnings from the Baltic states about Russian male violence. Now, politicians, officials, and experts in Estonia are recommending that Western nations pay attention and take their advice. Mark Michelson, a member of the ESD Australian Parliament and the committee responsible for foreign, stated that the world is complicated. Even though we are all members of the same organizations such as NATO or the EU, given Moscow's 2014 annexation of Crimea and the years leading up to it, it's possible that the interests of larger nations, particularly nuclear states and smaller nations like Estonia, could be at odds with one another. Agitation in the Donbass region, a propaganda campaign aimed at dehumanizing, and repeated military postures on the borders of Ukraine. Michelson had little doubt that some of the aggression was coming from Russia. A historic conflict broke out in Estonia. As a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the authorities in Estonia tore down war memorials from the Soviet era that were dedicated to Estonia's former imperial masters. Opinions were stoked among the 322,000 people in Estonia who identify as having Russian ancestry as a result of the campaign, complicating long-standing issues of integration and cross-border Russian influence. NATO and the EU, on the other hand, should resolve themselves in the 12-month struggle, showing little signs of breakouts that Moscow hopes will undermine the pro-Ukrainian coalition. This struggle should be resolved in the coming. However, ESD Foreign Minister Emas Ramos stated that the war was started by the stupidity of the West, recalling the indication that of the allies of Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2004. Ramos stated that this was the cause of the beginning of the conflict. Teen Brain Salute stated that taking action in stages with sanctions and weapons will make the conflict drag on for. They also claimed that they did not give Ukraine what it needed to win the war, but rather what it needed to survive. The foreign minister stated that increasing the number of weapons and the number of sanctions would be helpful in the ongoing war. However, the membership of Ukraine in NATO and the EU could prevent the next war. He urged all of the other NATO countries to follow Estonia's example and donate military equipment equal to 1% of their total budget, GDP, while simultaneously increasing their own defense budgets beyond the 2% target set by NATO and up to 2.5% or even 3% as part of the enhanced forward presence stance adopted by NATO. Estonia is playing host to a multinational combat group comprised of approximately 2,200 soldiers from the United Kingdom, France, Denmark, and ICE, Latvia, along with the other NATO countries that host additional warring groups on the alliance's eastern borders is one of the countries that you are a part of. Estonia is Baltic. Continued efforts are being made by NATO's neighbors to gain more power on the alliance's eastern flank. The railroad concept, in which the region was primarily envisioned as serving as a speed bump for Russian tanks, was abandoned by the alliance. However, the Baltic states are now demanding a larger troop presence, heavier weaponry, and air support. In a nutshell, the invasion of Russia sparked a historical debate in the West about the level of preparedness for military conflict. Despite the fact that Europe in particular reaped the benefits of reduced military spending, after the Cold War, Europe's armed forces continue to be. Border activity has been significantly reduced over the past several years. The majority of NATO appears to be incapable of handling a major conflict on a continental scale. Even if Russia comes out on the losing end of this conflict, it is implausible to believe that they will not come back with an even more intense desire for revenge. This scenario paints a very gloomy picture of what could happen. There is only one correct response for this. Increasing investments is one way to bolster defenses in the Baltic region. As part of this response, it is only a question of time before the conflict in Ukraine spreads to the countries of the Baltic region. The state is always on guard against the possibility of this happening, or it should be. Please make sure to subscribe to our channel and give the videos you watch a thumbs up. We appreciate you keeping an eye on us. Roger's fearful dream came. A decisive action was taken by the United States. The plane from the end of the world showed up in the Baltic. Putin was fuming with rage. Putin began making preparations for a very significant move, almost as soon as this event had concluded. Following this move, the United States went completely insane. While the support for Ukraine increased, the danger posed by Putin, whoever prevailed, had a significant impact on the rest of the. In these closing stages of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, Putin's policies have become increasingly unstable. The United States of America took action to combat this situation while keeping the rest of the world on its toes. The move that Putin made towards the Baltic, which came after 2 consecutive losses in the Black Sea, caused alarm in countries such as Norway and Estonia. An immediate and forceful intervention from NATO was carried out in response to this, despite the fact that it has anticipated that Ukraine will arrive at a distinct point. This assurance will completely alter the path that the war takes, which is why this step is so important due to the assistance that it has received from the United States and the European Union. Ukraine has been able to take the conflict over the border to a new, which has caused Russia to run into some significant difficulties of late. Putin initiated the process of organizing operations in the Black Sea, but Putin's plans did not work out as he had hoped. Russia was cornered as the Ukrainian army delivered blow after blow, leaving it with nowhere to hide. The Ukrainian army chose to ignore all of the victories that Russia had won, the most recent of which was the evacuation of the port of Sevastopol. Due to these very powerful forces aware that the Russian army had been defeated and forced to withdraw its war fleets to the Baltic Sea, he chose to ignore the news. On the other hand, the United States of America immediately reacted in a very severe manner to these moves. Since the beginning of the United States has been taking action to show their support for Ukraine while Russia has been falling further behind. When Putin realized this, he began making threats with nuclear weapons against the entire world, particularly those countries that support Ukraine. However, the United States of America made the decisive move that ensured these dangers would no longer be tolerated. When Putin became very angry and began to push, the Russian army immediately began to lose all of the advantages it had in relation to Ukraine. By pitting his most powerful submarines against both the United States and the Baltic region, he managed to completely confuse the situation. Immediately following Putin's suspension of the final disarmament treaty with the West, things went from bad to worse. It was signed in the wake of the end of the Cold War with the intention of eliminating the nuclear, but Putin suspended it after the public became aware of his shenanigans in the Ukraine war. When it became apparent to the United States that the Baltic states required assistance, the country dispatched 16 of its E-6B Mercury ships, also referred to as doomsday plans, to Iceland. This has created the conditions for a major crisis in the Baltic region, and these fighter jets, which are armed with anti-aircraft guns, are essential in the event of a nuclear. The fact that Russia has been forced to give up its E-6B Mercury missiles, which are also capable of controlling nuclear weapons, is further evidence that the circle has become smaller for the country. But the mind-blowing move that Putin made immediately after this incident has ratcheted up the tension in the Baltic region. In retaliation for this action taken by the United States, Russia dispatched some of the most advanced submarines in the world to the Baltic. There is nothing in the world more exciting than these submarines traveling through the Baltic Sea while carrying nuclear weapons. This demonstrates to us once more the basis of Putin's invasion plan, which we will follow the nuclear submarine with. The name Dmitry Donskoy is referred to as a destroyer by analysts from around the world. Because of this situation, there is a lot of confusion about how the war will continue. While there is still a chance that there will be a third world, the betrayal of one of the largest companies in Russia, the involvement of allies, has significantly complicated matters. Up until recently, the world could be broken down into 2 primary blocks. But following the conflict in Ukraine and Russia, these blocks have completely rearranged themselves. The United States was left with a profound sense of disillusionment when it became clear that some countries within NATO covertly supported. The real problem, however, was that Russia was dealt a devastating blow by Japan at a time when it was desperately in need of allies. The reckless actions taken by Russia were one of the primary topics of discussion at the G7 summit. The most economically powerful nations on the planet took notice of Vladimir Putin's nuclear threats because he used very harsh language, not only against Ukraine, but also against all of the countries of the. An extensive embargo package was introduced as a response to the policies implemented by Russia. Not only that, but a great number of countries almost multiplied the amount of support they give to the Ukraine. A significant amount of attention was drawn to the fact that Japan was positioned first on the list. Since the beginning of the conflict, Japan has only provided Ukraine with verbal, because the majority of its assistance took the form of humanitarian aid. It did not play a role that was particularly significant or decisive in the conflict. However, with this most recent action, the Japanese military's assistance has been elevated to a whole new level to this point. Japan has contributed 550 million in, but in light of recent events that have caused Japan concern, it has decided to increase this year's contribution to 5.5 billion. This record of support has been maintained thus far, considered to be among the largest in the world, and in light of the fact that the Ukrainian army is currently being formed from the ground up, it is no surprise that such equipment was admired all over the fact that reinforcements are being sent to Ukraine just in time to deal with this unfortunate turn of events is one of the signs that victory is drawing near for Ukraine. Since the beginning of the war between Russia and Ukraine, the provision of aid to the Ukrainian army has been at the forefront of discussions across the globe. However, the total amount of these donations has been the subject of much debate in the media since the conflict with the Ukrainian army first broke. Was using weak tanks and weapons from Russia, but thanks to the support it received from Western countries, it's a great surprise how Ukraine has reached this point today. In other words, Ukraine has created a great surprise. To date, approximately 42.2 billion worth of support has been provided to the Ukrainian army. Not only is this amount of support high enough to rebuild an army, but thanks to the active training of the Special Forces Unit Center, the infantry class in the army has also reached a completely different point. This means that not only is this amount of support high enough to rebuild an army, but it is also high enough to completely transform the army. However, the most significant progress made by the Ukrainian military has been in the realm of intelligence. Ukraine is in a completely different position now as a result of the assistance that was provided by a number of countries to the Ukrainian army in terms of the development of intelligence, as well as the assistance that was provided by Israeli and American intelligence before the Ukrainian operations. The fact that Ukraine was aware of the difficulties in operations of the Russian army before the Kremlin was something that drove Vladimir Putin completely insane. Putin continues to come out on the losing end because the responsibility for his recent difficulties does not lie with his own administration, but rather with the nations that have supported Ukraine. Despite the advancement of the Ukrainian government, army life is taken quite seriously. The predicament that the Russian army currently finds itself in is the primary source of concern. The feedback that military analysts have provided on this subject has been widely discussed all over even though they have received a great deal of support, the Ukrainian army is said to have demonstrated to the entire world a very significant occurrence that has captured everyone's attention ever since the conflict first started. This was documented as an act of national unity and solidarity on the part of Ukraine. However, the Russian military does not operate in this manner. Instead, the Russian army is made up of conscripts and junior officers with little to no combat experience. The fact that they are aware that they are illegally occupying Ukraine is the primary factor in their decision not to volunteer. In addition, there is no doubt that the complex environment in which the Russian army currently operates will have certain repercussions. The Russian army is comprised primarily of three different categories of service members. There is not a single one of these soldiers who is qualified to contribute to the success of the Russian army. The first group consists of inexperienced Russian soldiers who are reluctant to fight. The second is a group of van mercenaries, and the third is a soldier who was chosen from one of the minority groups. What about Russia? There is no need for any of the three groups to take into account Russia's progress or gains before. This puts Putin in an even more precarious position than before. There is a lot of upheaval in Moscow. The Russian people have put Putin in an impossible position. The revolt has spread throughout the entirety of the nation's capital. A significant portion of Russians have initiated the preparations necessary to leave the country. In response to this, Putin has made some very severe decisions. Reverberations have been heard all over the world as a result of the unrestricted authority that was granted to local law enforcement agencies. Putin is at a loss for what to do after suffering a loss of confidence in his leadership. The Russian people started to react very strongly when it became clear that the most recent developments in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine were going in favor of Ukraine. Putin was caught off guard by an unexpected move made by who were well aware that Russia was in a bind by organizing amongst themselves. The Russian people have made a very significant step forward. Things went in a completely different direction. Once Putin, who had already received reactions from many states around the world, received reactions from his own people, the general public, and the media started to speculate about whether or not Putin was in his final. Nevertheless, Putin persists in his unyielding stance regarding the war. Despite these questions, Russia's performance in the war has been marked by major setback after major setback. The obstinate and autocratic behavior of Vladimir Putin is the primary cause of many of these setbacks. The Russian people have recently become very angry as a result of this, but the main point is that Putin sent troops to Bakhmut where they were in imminent danger of Because of Putin's misguided policies, a great number of Russian service members have been killed since the conflict first broke out. Putin has concocted yet another nefarious scheme to address the shortage of infantry in the Russian armed forces. As soon as Putin realized he was going to lose the war, he quickly declared a partial mobilization of his forces, despite the fact that this was followed by significant demonstrations. People from underrepresented groups participated more actively in this mobilization, but Putin was forced to make a very difficult choice this time as a direct result of the loss of a significant number of infantrymen. According to the information that has been gathered, approximately 2 million people rose up in opposition to this decision this time. The recent collection of signatures for peace is evidence that people are becoming more organized in preparation for anti-war demonstration. But the new plan that Putin has proposed is more than enough for these individuals to take to the streets. Everything began when rumors began to circulate about Putin's second mobilization. This could very well be the beginning of the end for Putin. The widespread mistrust that the world has for the Russian military has been brought to the attention of the public all over the Russian people who are aware of their predicament have expressed that they do not wish to serve in the military and have also suggested that their relatives who are serving in the military begin peace talks. In response to this event, a significant petition drive was initiated in the Russian Federation and Russia. Approximately 40 million people have demanded that Putin's rule be altered across all signature platforms, including social. This includes the international community. The primary reason for this predicament is that an extremely large reduction in the number of Russian soldiers has taken place in recent times. This is the motivation behind Putin's desire to launch another mobilization of approximately 500,000 people. However, there is widespread opposition to it among the populace because they are aware that it will result in even more widespread ion. Around 2 million people organized among the population of Russia have begun making preparations for a significant uprising in the event that this mobilization decision is implemented. Due to the fact that Putin is aware of this, his decisions have once again made their way onto the agenda of the entire world. It is common knowledge that Russia does not possess the resources necessary to put down such a rebel. Because Putin is so committed to maintaining his insistence on Ukraine, he has devised a strategy to stifle the protests. The first step he plans to take is to beef up the capabilities of the local law enforcement agencies, as well as his own personal army. The Rosguardia, also known as the National Guard, is the name of this army. It is the mission of this army to put down any uprisings that may break out in. However, as the war began to take shape, its objectives were rethought from the ground up. The initial phase of these tasks focuses on locating Russians who are attempting to flee the conflict and meting out the appropriate punishments to those individuals. It is likely that the number of potential war crimes will increase as a result of these punishments. Rosguardia has been gaining notoriety for quite some time, primarily as a result of its actions against the opposition in Russia. But if the sites change at some point in the future, it might cause them a significant amount of trouble. As a result of Russia's government's inability to put down recent protests, the country is facing uncertain consequences. However, there are rumors circulating that this particular group actually has a secret objective. The Russian people's future is put in jeopardy as a result of this unknown. The current leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin, is well aware that he has been operating the country in an authoritarian fashion as of late. This is leading to a significant increase in the number of individuals who wish to oust him from his position of power. Putin, who is also aware of the situation, has made the decision to construct a very large army in order to combat those individuals who intend to remove him from. In fact, this is the primary objective that Retard seeks to achieve. In recent times, the military has begun to take notice of Putin's disastrous policies, and this is because one of the things that Putin is most concerned about is the possibility that the army will take action as a result of its unease. With the current circumstances, the entire military is of the opinion that the failure in Ukraine can be attributed to Putin's misguided policy. The various factions that exist within the army have started to become more obvious as a result of this situation. Everyone can see that it is extremely unlikely that Russia will be successful because these groups are so geographically distant from each other. Vanner Mercenaries, a company established by Afghani Ferguson, are one of the three primary components that make up the Russian army. The other two components are Russian, who are typically inexperienced and regional commanders. It is also known as the team that has the most invested interest in the conflict. Continuing the cause of this is an unsettling idea that has the power to stop blood circulation. The third group consists of the minority military groups, which are characterized by their lack of experience and poor performance in battle. It is extremely unlikely that these three different groups will be able to cooperate and complete the task success. The will of the people is reflected in the organizational structure of the Ukrainian armed forces. Because of this, it is able to consistently take aggressive action against Russia. The Russian military does not have a purpose to fight for, so they are unable to achieve the level of success required in their operations. This is because they do not have a common objective. Because of this, they're unable to mount any kind of resistance against the Ukrainian. According to analysts of the conflict, the majority of the Russian army that the Ukrainian army is competing against is composed of Wagner mercenaries, which is the primary reason for the Ukrainian army's success, especially in Bakhmut. This band of mercenaries is after as much money as they can make for their services. This works even more favorably for Ukraine's position in the fact that the Ukrainian soldiers are so well organized and are fighting with such clear objectives paves the way for them to carry out the killing that is being planned 12 to Russia. The actions that the Ukraine will take in the wake of the current crisis are starting to become more transparent. The support that the Ukraine will provide for the United States in a variety of domains will play a significant role in the actions that it will. However, the most recent support is beginning to show the governments of the United States of America, Germany, and the United Kingdom have publicly stated their support for Ukraine. The assistance that Ukraine received in the past with regard to its defense is no longer provided. The majority of the support has shifted to being offensive. This gives the impression that the Ukrainian army will soon take a very big step and direct all of its forces against. This gives the impression that the Ukrainian army will soon take a very big step. There has also been speculation that Ukraine might move the conflict to a different geographical area by conducting operations across the border in Russia. Ukraine has started to wreak havoc in that country. Even though Putin has denied many of these allegations, it is abundantly clear what is taking. The fact that Putin is unable to secure Russia's borders is possibly an indication that the country is not being led by the appropriate ruler. The majority of Ukrainian soldiers have come to this conclusion, and they are now in a position where they can respect Zelensky's leadership. The most significant factor that led to the advances made by the Ukrainian army was the capture of Zelensky. The actions that he has taken in foreign policy are significant enough to bring victory to the Ukrainian.